Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy the next hour that we have for you. My name is Jennifer Scanlon. I'm a Senior Vice President at USG Corporation and President of our International Division. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Chicago Council, and I am pleased on behalf of the Council to see so many of you here today to engage on an extremely important topic for women across the country and around the world. We're pleased to have Senator Kirsten Gillibrand here today to discuss her new book, and in particular, the topic of why there aren't more women involved in leadership positions, particularly in Washington. This is a part of the focus of her new book and campaign that is titled Off the Sidelines. While more and more women are getting involved in politics in the United States, they still struggle to make their voices heard. Currently, only 18.5% of Congress is represented by women. At the state level, women are slightly more involved, with 24% participation. And Illinois, by the way, ranks fairly high, with 32%. The importance of having our voice heard cannot be understated, and I'm looking very forward to hearing the Senator talk about that today. There are a number of questions that are raised as we think about this topic. What is it that's keeping that disparity so large? Are these problems just centered in Washington, or is the system working against women at the grassroots level? And so, while we think about these types of questions, I believe it's very helpful for us to hear from a woman who has really circumnavigated many of these challenges. Senator Gillibrand has done just that and is ideally situated to comment on what might work to empower women to be more active, not just in Washington, but around the country in our everyday lives. You have a full biography of Senator Gillibrand in your program, but let me highlight some of the key points of her career. She served 3 years in the House of Representatives before being appointed to the Senate in 2009, which was around the time I became aware of her and I believe joined her fan club. She was reelected in 2012, and prior to her service in Washington, she worked as an attorney for Davis, Polk, and Wardwell. She earned her bachelor's from Dartmouth College and her law degree from UCLA School of Law. Senator Gillibrand is joined today by Michelle Seitz, who will be interviewing her. Michelle is a fellow member of the Chicago Council, a Director's Circle member. She's a partner and member of the William Blair and Company's Executive Committee and head of William Blair Investment Management. Michelle is also one of the founding co-chairs of the Chicago Council's Women and Global Development Forum, which is sponsoring this event today. After Michelle's interview with the Senator, Neve King will return to the stage to moderate the audience questions and answer session. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving Senator Kirsten Gillibrand a very warm welcome to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs.
Thank you. As one of the founding co-chairs of the Women in Global Development Forum, I couldn't be more gratified to be sharing the stage with the Senator. And I know we all share a mutual admiration. You talked about Hillary Clinton a fair amount in the book, but the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, did say if the 19th century was the end of slavery and the 20th century has been the end of totalitarianism, then the 21st century should be about the elimination of the pervasive discrimination and degradation of women and fulfilling their full rights. So with that, this turnout is a testament to the Council's vision in launching this forum 5 years ago, and we are filled with successful private sector candidates who could be leaders in government. Our motive over the course of the next 25 minutes, so a grand goal is to make sure that we engage all of you to either run for office, support those who are willing to run for office, or otherwise find your voice around matters that mean the most to you. The goal, in terms of trying to get this done, I sat here and thought about what would fire up the audience, and Gloria Steinem always fires me up. So I watched again the PBS documentary, Women Makers, and the senator is also on those interviews. I would encourage everyone to watch it. But one of Gloria's famous quotes was, "The truth will set you free, but first it has to piss you off." And so your blunt truth that you talk about in the book is that you believe the women's movement is dead or on life support, and I'm going to quote a section of the book. "Ours is the only nation in the developed world with no paid maternity leave, no paid family sick leave. We don't ensure affordable daycare, provide universal pre-K, or mandate equal pay for equal work. And what do we do when our representatives fail to fight for our issues on these things? We do nothing. No axes drop, no boom comes down." Is this the call to arms you wanted to achieve, and what is it you want this room to do?
Well, I wrote the book, and that really speaks to why I wrote the book, is I think women's voices are so important. I think our life experiences are so different. I think our view of the world, what our priorities are, what our solutions would be, are very different. And I think the absence of our voices in all halls of decision-making, at every decision-making table, is really problematic and bad for America. In fact, every time I've seen a woman's voice be heard at any given table or any given point of decision-making, outcomes are better, because it's the diversity of view. It's the fact that the view is different than our male voices, and it's the combination of the male and female voices together that is so strong. And I can give you just one anecdote. In the political life, and there's many in the non-political life, but in the political life, when I was first elected in 2006, I was appointed to the Armed Services Committee, and Speaker Pelosi put 5 women on the committee who were new that year, and it changed the gender balance of the committee. So we were having hearings specifically on military readiness, and our male colleagues focused on things that they typically focused on: equipment, how many ships, how many guns, how many aircraft, to show that we were militarily ready for any battle or threat. But the women focused on different issues. Gabby Giffords was sitting right next to me. She talked about a base in her district where the doctor told her 70% of men and women going back into combat were not mentally ready. And I amplified that and said, why is the divorce rate and the domestic violence rate and the suicide rate higher than it's ever been in the history of America? What are you doing about PTSD and traumatic brain injury? And are you supporting the well-being of the men and women in combat? And so together, that was a fuller discussion of what's military readiness. And so I want to see more of that, regardless of where it's taking place.
So do you have specific goals in mind, as we heard earlier from Jennifer? So 20% representation on average in the Senate and a little bit less overall in Congress. There was a study done by a Harvard business professor, I think it was in 1977, talking about 30% being a tipping point where a minority group is no longer viewed through the lens of their gender or their minority status or seen as a token, but instead they really have full participation and engagement in a topic. Is there not that there's a quota necessarily, but is there a goal that you think is important for that tipping point?
The goal is parity. The goal is full representation of women, 51%. And I guarantee you, if we had 51% of women in Congress, we would not have wasted the last 2 congressional sessions focusing on whether women should have access to affordable birth control. 98% of American women take birth control. If women were 51%, it would be a foregone conclusion, and we would be talking about other things that are important, like the economy and national security and everything but. So really on the congressional level, I really want to see 51%. But I'll tell you another story which talks about the other part of this call to action. When I was working on a Sunday, and I start the book this way actually, when I was working on a Sunday, my husband took my 2 boys, Henry and Theo, on a hike, and they went to Theodore Roosevelt Island, which is in the middle of the Potomac River. And it's a great place of frogs and marshes and lots of birds. And Henry was 2 1/2 at the time, and Jonathan, sensing Henry slowing down, says, "Come on, Henry." And Henry looks up and says, "Oh, Daddy, we can do it because we're men." So I get this story at the end of the day, and I'm thinking, what? How could my son say something like that? Well, what I realized at that moment was how many girls are saying, Mommy, we can do it because we're women. And my answer is, I don't think enough. And so I want more girls, regardless of where they live, regardless of what they do, regardless of what their dreams are, I want them to dream big. I want them to know that ambition is not a dirty word, and I want them to say we can do it because we're women.
Fabulous. And the goal of 51%, is that something you think we can achieve
Yes.
in our generation?
Maybe. It will be hard. We have impediments and challenges, and we have to create a call to action. I mean, this book is part memoir, part self-helpy, because I like self-helpy books, and it's part call to action. And the book is really about making sure all women's voices are heard wherever they want to be heard, whatever issues they care about, because it's not happening. It's not going to happen by itself. It's not this innate thing that 2.5-year-old boys seem to know, that they are endowed with God's greatest creation. It's something that we need to inspire and cultivate and assure our young girls that they can still be liked and have big dreams. They can still be feminine and accomplish great things. They can still be strong, but also be loved. It is so important that those young girls know early on that there's nothing they can't do.
So what crosses my mind in business, we always have to set out the goal. You begin with the end in mind, and you know what you have to do in order to truly move the needle, structural change. To get to 51% at the same pace, which has been gaining steam, would take us 100 years to get to full parity. So I just, in terms of thinking about that, and in terms of thinking about the structural changes that have to occur, I think Gloria Steinem said in that documentary, I can't remember how many bills would have to be overturned, but it would have taken them 150 years just to take laws out of the Constitution that held women down, and that was the impetus for the ERA, was to try to strike it down all at once. What types of things, or what other countries outside of the ones that have put in quotas have done things that have truly made systemic change so that you get an exponential impact and we truncate that 100-year period that we're on a trajectory for?
Well, I think there's a couple of things we need to do. We need to have a national conversation, which is what I'm trying to start by this book. And the way I describe it is what Rosie the Riveter was for my grandmother's generation. Rosie the Riveter was an iconic advertising campaign. It was a woman with her sleeves rolled up. The slogan was, "We can do it." And it was specifically asking women to enter the workforce during World War II to take on some of these industries, war industries that needed workers. My grandmother, my grandmother's sister, and my great-grandmother all worked at the Waterville Arsenal because of Rosie, to help build the big guns they needed in World War II. Women responded to that campaign because of two reasons. First, it said we can do it, so it assured them these are jobs you can actually do. And the second thing they assured women is that they were needed for the health and well-being of the country. So I want to create a call to action today that women's voices are needed for the health and the well-being of the country. And if I could get 6 million more women like Rosie did, 6 million more women entered the workforce because of that campaign. If we could get 6 million more women voting or being advocates or fighting for what they believe in or holding these elected leaders accountable. Women living in red states use birth control too, but is there any accountability for the dragging on this issue over and over again when it should be decided? There isn't. They keep getting elected. So if women's voices are elevated and we rise up and demand that they're heard, I think we'll have a different national agenda. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I would do in political life is get money out of politics. I think having publicly funded elections would go a long way. It would go a long way to changing the landscape, because what women dislike about politics, and you can ask yourselves this right now, how many women in this room would run for office today? How many? How many? And for all those who didn't raise their hand, why wouldn't you do it?
Fundraising.
More than that, you'd be like, I would never do that to my family. Politics are so dirty, so nasty, so negative. I would never put myself out there. I would never subject myself to that. And that is the typical answer I will hear from any young woman candidate who's considering running, but when she's willing to state her fears, that's really what it is. It's so rough and tumble. Well, one of the main reasons why it is so aggressive and nasty is the unlimited spending in political campaigns, because all of that unlimited spending, particularly by corporations with no disclosure, is funding the negative ads. That's where all the hundreds of millions of dollars spent every election cycle is going all to negative attack ads. And so for a typical woman, they look at politics and they say, that is a dirty business, I have no interest. But if you said to them, yes, but you really care about global climate change and your son has asthma, and if you make this your legislative agenda to really begin to have policies that create clean air and clean water, you will actually make the difference, and you're the only one who's going to fight for it, that woman might well say, well, you're right, I would fight for that, and that is an important cause, and I really want to get that done. When a woman is pulled in because she believes in something, because she knows she can be the change maker, or she can change the conversation, she will do it because she knows she's needed. So that has to change, and so I think those are the two things we should expect most. And then raise our daughters to be fearless, to not be afraid. Sports is a good indicator on whether someone will run for office, so encourage her to play those sports and learn how to compete as a young woman and not be afraid of losing. Those are really good things we can do for the next generation.
Completely agreed. What about the men? The men are currently in power. We need them to engage. This is true in the business world as well. Lots of initiatives to get women on corporate boards, women in the C-suite, and the answer is it has to be with the full engagement and support of the men that are existing in power.
Well, you know, you're from corporate America, make the business case. And what a lot of great companies are doing is making that case. When women are on corporate boards, the returns on investment, the returns on equity are higher. When even one woman is on a corporate board, that company is 40% less likely to have to restate their earnings. Think that through. Okay, so we are value added when we have a role at the decision-making table. It's true in small businesses. Women are able to start their small businesses with 7 times less capital, but they are still among the fastest performing, fastest growing segments within the small business population. So when women do have roles, we are value added. And so what I would encourage corporate America and all of America to do is just remember what women actually bring to the table. And I love the way Geraldine Ferraro said this in her 1984 convention speech when she was picked to be the vice presidential candidate. She said, it's not what America can do for women, it's what women can do for America. And that's really the point, that we have so much to offer. We are actually graduating more than half of the college degrees, more than half of the advanced degrees in this country today. We already have academic parity. And all that education, all that training, all that common sense should be utilized to its fullest. But one of our biggest challenges is workplace rules have not kept up with the face of the workforce. Our workplace policies are stuck in the Mad Men era when mom stayed at home and dads went to work. But today, 8 out of 10 families, moms are going to work. 4 out of 10 families, moms are the primary or sole breadwinners. And so if you don't have something as simple as paid leave, because women are going to look after their families when they need to, whether it's a new baby, whether it's a child who's gravely ill or gets hit by a car and is in a wheelchair for months and she needs to look after them, or whether it's an aging parent or a dying mother, those are things we will take care of when we need to, but we almost always do it at the expense of our careers and our ability to earn a living. So we either ramp off, which a lot of professional women do at some stage, work less hours, maybe change jobs to something that's less demanding, or in the worst case scenarios, when you're talking about a low-wage worker, the woman who's going to clean this ballroom tonight, I guarantee you she has no flexibility. And if she's sick and her caregiver, is sick and she has to look after her child, if she misses a day of work, she's likely going to be fired. She doesn't have sick days. So the lack of support for basic flexibility for women in the workplace is undermining our chance to grow economically, because all those women aren't earning at their full potential. When a woman does ramp off, studies will show she never ramps on at the level or the salary from where she left. And so she's just not earning and her full potential or even getting to the leadership level that her talents would want. And so that's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge. It's a artificial drag on the U.S. economy.
So those structural impediments, obviously many are being addressed within corporate America, and I think a lot of great movements are taking place. What legislatively are you focused on tackling, or you would have us engage in the debate that would really get at what you believe to be core structural impediments?
Well, there's 5, and I try to make it super easy. It's my opportunity agenda for women in the workplace. Equal pay for equal work. It's illegal in some companies to actually ask your friend who's a guy, how much do you make for the same job we're doing? That conversation could actually get you fired. So we have a very simple bill called the Equal Pay Act that basically says you can discuss your salary with your coworkers, and it creates incentives for companies to publish and to really look hard at their numbers. What are the women in my firm doing and the men in my firm doing, and are they being paid, and is there real reasons? And so it puts the onus more on the companies to be assured and be certain that they are not paying their employees equally or disproportionately because of their gender. So equal pay for equal work. Universal pre-K would be an enormous benefit for all working parents, but often for working moms to have that year of school covered. Affordable daycare for the low-wage worker. In my state, average daycare is $10,000 a year. So imagine you're a minimum wage worker, that's $15,000 a year. You cannot afford daycare for that whole first 5 years before your child's in kindergarten. So you're going to have to focus on informal care, the lady next door, your mother, a relative. And again, back to that caregiver dilemma. If your caregiver's sick and you need to pick up your child, you are likely not going to be able to hold on to your job, or you will certainly never be eligible for promotions because you'll be seen as unreliable. That's very problematic. And then the biggest and most important structural change is paid leave. We're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have paid leave. Afghanistan and Pakistan, which don't even educate their girls, have paid leave. They have 8 and 9 weeks. We have 0. It's a huge problem because whatever that life trauma is or that necessity is, if a woman cannot accommodate it, she will either have to leave her job or change her expectations in the job at some level.
When you think about tackling these issues in the U.S., to be honest, we've had many various speakers talking about the women in the rest of the world. And when you think about the priorities that we set for ourselves and the opportunities that we're trying to present to the U.S. Women, how do you think about that in relation to the rest of the world, where women around the world are struggling at the lowest rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I mean, how is the focus in the U.S. and getting these things fixed in the U.S., empowering women in the U.S., going to help spread equality and fulfillment of rights for women worldwide?
Well, there's a lot of not-for-profit organizations that really study this and figure out how do we help women attain a measure of equality in their society. The 2 biggest indicators, and Nick Kristof writes about this in his book, Half the Sky, is if you can give women microlending, they can do enormous good for their communities and for their families, and if you give them access to education. And so those are our biggest international goals, I think, for women's development, are those 2 things. And women are very good at business. If you give them a $50 loan, that is enough to start a business, buy a stall, begin to create whatever you're selling, and actually pay those loans back. The return rate for those loans are extraordinarily good. So it's a good business model also. But for in terms of leadership in the US, I can tell you, we will see these problems perhaps better. We will use these opportunities we have. When I was a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I made sure that women's empowerment and women's leadership was in our funding bill for support in, I think it was for the Peshawar region between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I put that as a measurable for some of our foreign aid, that they have to engage in this. That wouldn't have happened if I wasn't looking at the issue. It was because I saw the importance of it, I understood the importance of it. And so any one woman can see something she wants to focus on that will help others, whether we do it through the not-for-profit lens or whether we do it through the governing lens.
Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit, you've made quite a name for yourself as a junior senator because of the persistence and willingness to take on some of the biggest and most difficult assignments, like assault in the military. Taking on the entire Department of Defense was no small feat. The same thing for college assaults on campuses, and I think I know the audience well enough and look at the age group. If you want to fire up a group of people to get something done, tell your story about both of those topics and the people that affected you and motivated you to take on these issues.
Well, I use all of those issues as examples of how important one woman's voice can be. If you're talking about sexual assault on college campus, it was 2 young women who came to my Senate office and asked for a meeting. My staff was smart enough to set that meeting up, and I met with them. And then they tell me these horrible stories about how they're brutally raped, both in North Carolina, and how when they reported the rape, they were disbelieved. Eventually, they were retaliated against by their schools for reporting them. And because of their own personal courage, they decided to take this issue to a broader audience. And they went school to school and found other men and women who were equally victimized and had to survive horrible incidents. And encourage them to be heard on what happened to them. So they've started a movement across college campuses where women and men are speaking truth to power in the most bold way they can. Some of them have done it on the front page of the New York Times, and it's made a difference. And so they are starting this movement about getting justice on college campuses for campus assault and rape, and holding administrators accountable for not meeting their Title IX obligations. And now, because of their advocacy, we have a big piece of legislation that we have bipartisan support on. You know, the most Democratic liberal senators and the most conservative Republican senators, because it's not an ideological issue. The same thing was true with sexual assault in the military. It was the voices of these men and women who told their stories in a documentary, The Invisible War, that grabbed my heart and said, oh my God, these stories are so horrific. And they're the same. The brutalization of the man or the woman, the commanders saying it's your own fault, or I'm going to prosecute you for drinking, or, you know, not doing anything, and that second betrayal of the institution. And so one of the things I think we can talk about and really have a national debate on is this institutional bias that favors the star football player, as we're watching with the NFL. The institutional bias where the star soldier with the wife and 2 kids couldn't possibly have brutally raped that new young lieutenant who's just joined the unit. Well, that's exactly what happens. And in the institutional bias on our campuses, where it's far more important to protect the reputation of the institution than to protect that one woman and that survivor and believe her and make sure justice is done. So I think these are longer term, larger scale problems of, are women valued? You know, we talk about it in the economic sense easily. Women get 78 cents on the dollar. But let's talk about in all these other contexts where the survivor of these horrible assaults are women who are devalued, who are not believed, who are blamed. And you see the institutional bias closing ranks in every one of those circumstances.
So we see you taking on issues that are unlikely to pass through a bill or to affect change in that way, but you've said that there's good in the fight. I mean, when you think about your life in public service 30 more years from now, I mean, what is it that you're focused on, and why are you taking on each of these issues? Are you trying to move the needle on the dialogue so that change can occur? And when you think about the legacy you want to leave behind, how do you think through that in terms of the priorities you take on?
Well, I definitely never think about legacies because that's irrelevant to me. What I do think about is the person who is suffering. It's almost always an issue of grave injustice or horrible suffering or civil rights. When I took on the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell reform, Kirsten, will you please meet with my client? He's a soldier and he has a story to tell you. And I said, of course. And so I met with him. It was Lieutenant Dan Choi, who was decorated, had accomplished so much in the military. But he said, you know, I joined the military because I believed in the integrity and character and the drive of what the military requires. He said, but when I was told I had to lie to everyone I know and work with about who I love, he said I couldn't do it. It was a violation of my integrity. I felt I had no character, I had no honesty, and I couldn't do it anymore. And that really drove me to do something about it. And I figured other senators were on this already, taking care of it. But in fact, that wasn't the case. Our only champion was really Ted Kennedy, and he was diagnosed with brain cancer. So there was no one in the Senate that was doing this issue. And so I started working on it. And you know, one of the lessons I teach in the book is, you know, you'll get support from places that you never imagined, but you have to ask for help. You have to start the fight. You have to start the dialogue. And so when I talked to Harry Reid, he said, Kirsten, I support you. I will help you. And so he writes a letter to the president saying, we want you to put Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal on the national agenda. When I talked to Carl Levin, he said, Kirsten, I actually agree with you. And I said, will you hold a hearing? He said, yep, I will. First hearing in 16 years. It made a difference. 13,000 personnel had been lost. More than 1,000 of mission-critical men and women. More than 10% of our foreign language speakers all lost because of who they love. It's absurd. It made no sense, and it was outrageous, and it was corrosive. And so I fought for that issue because it came to me, and no one was fighting for it. And that's sort of the larger point I make in the book, is that there may be something you care about, and you may be the only person that can carry that message. It's your life experience. It's what's happened to you. It's your perspective on the way we should be doing things that may well be unique. And you may be the only person there at that place at that time that could actually be the right messenger. And so maybe because you are on the school board, you can actually change the school lunch program to deal with childhood obesity. Or maybe because you are the homeroom parent, that you could deal with a crisis that's happening in your daughter's class. You have no idea where your voice is going to matter or in what context. But my statement is, it matters, it's different, and it's important, and that difference is good.
Mm-hmm. You write a lot in your book about that moment, the aha moment for you, and a lot of that had to do with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I have a sign above my desk that says, never underestimate the power of a moment. And what I was struck by in your book was writing about, you had a cumulative of 90 minutes prior with Hillary Clinton in conversation prior to taking over her Senate seat. 90 minutes.
Total.
And that was enough. That was enough
Definitely.
to motivate you, to have a vision, to have your aha moment. Just talk a little bit about that and what that's meant to you.
So most of you are in the corporate world, and we talk a lot in corporate America about mentors and sponsors and how important they are, along with role models. Well, I had some amazing role models in my life. The first was my grandmother, who never went to college, was a 20-year-old secretary in our state legislature in Albany, and had this idea that she actually wanted to be heard. And you have to remember, some 75 years ago, women had very little role in government. They were rarely elected to anything, and if they were, it was because they took over their husband's seat. It was very rare for women to have any power at all. But she realized that if she amplified her voice with other women's voices, that together they could be heard. And so she got women all across Albany and upstate New York to work on campaigns and said, let's decide who we're going to support, and then let's work our hearts out for them. So door to door, envelope stuffing, phone banking. And over time, over the next several decades, my grandmother became powerful, because you couldn't get elected in Albany if you didn't have the blessing of my grandmother and her lady friends. They were the ones who did all the work. So she used that power for the good of her community to actually instill in not only the elected leaders what her priorities were and her community's priorities were, but really had her say. So I learned from her that women's voices really matter, that grassroots activism can always make a difference, and that what you do with your time matters. And so I always wanted to do public service. I had this aspiration as a 10-year-old girl that someday I want to be a senator. But I didn't know what a senator was. It just sounded important. And it sounded like they could do good things. But I didn't know what it was. But I lost those childhood dreams once I got into the real world of being a young woman, going to high school, going to college. I did nothing politically. And it wasn't until I was a young lawyer sitting in a big firm, Davis Polk, and I noticed that Hillary Clinton went to China as our first lady. Now, I was an Asian studies major at Dartmouth. I studied in the dorms in Beijing. I learned Mandarin, and so I knew very clearly how powerful it was for her to give that message that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights from a stage in Beijing. I thought it was transformational, but what I was really upset about is I didn't know about the conference. I didn't know about it, I wasn't invited, and I thought, I should know about these things. And so that was what made me realize I wasn't involved in politics, and if I wanted to be invited to a conference like that, I would have had to be involved in politics. So I called my girlfriend, whose mom was really involved in politics, and I said, what do I do? I don't know anything about New York City. How do I get involved? And she said, join the Women's Leadership Forum. It's a new group. It's a fundraising arm of the DNC. That's where all the women are doing stuff on politics. I said, fine. So I called the lady in charge, and this is relevant for the young women in the room. And she says, of course you can join the WLF. You just need to write me a check for $1,000. $1,000, that's a lot of money. I was young. That was my rent check. So I decide I'm going to write the check because it's the only thing I've been advised to do. So I write my check, and I go to my first big event, and it's at a fancy club in Midtown in New York City. And I'm, in a big room like this, but I'm way at the back, and I'm the youngest by 10 or 20 years, maybe even 30. I mean, it just wasn't my generation. And I'm nervous because Hillary Clinton's going to be there, and she's clearly a role model for me already. And she gives this speech about public service, and she says, decisions are being made every day in Washington. And if you are not part of those decisions and you don't like what they are, you have no one to blame but yourself. And for some reason, I felt like she was talking only to me. And And I start sweating, and I start getting anxious and thinking, oh my God, she's telling me I have to run for office, and I'm too scared, and I can't possibly do that. So it was my aha moment that I had to realize I really do want to be a public servant. I want to be involved in politics on some level. And I was afraid to admit it because, as many young women feel, I'm not qualified, I'm not smart enough, only people who are really self-centered and arrogant are politicians, or I can't possibly think that highly of myself that I could run for office. And so I had all those feelings of doubt that we often do. And so that started a 10-year-long journey for me to get involved in politics. I started stuffing envelopes, working on campaigns, helping Hillary when she decided to run for Senate. But it was that moment that I realized it was my ambition. And so one of the chapters in the book is ambition is not a dirty word, that you must learn to own your ambitions, not be afraid of big things. And then even though we dislike that word, all the studies show ambition is terrible in women but great in men, it's just a word. You know, we all believe in having high hopes and big dreams, and whether we call it ambition or not, it doesn't matter, but we should embrace those dreams and embrace those high hopes.
So let's talk about that one for a second, kind of paring it back to the public funding. Let's assume we get public funding, not private funding for elections. Meg Whitman, no stranger to the competition of ambition in a men's world. Meg went to Harvard Business School, one of the few women in her class. She went on to various corporate jobs, ran eBay, and is now the CEO and chairman of Hewlett-Packard. But she said by far the most difficult and painful experience of her life was running for California governor. Mm-hmm. And her depiction of that is that there's a very fine line that's even more pronounced in government than it is in U.S. corporate channels, and that is that the arrogance line, making sure that you're tough enough to do the job, and the perception is you're tough enough to do the job on behalf of all constituents, obviously, but not mean-spirited. I think her characterization was Cruella de Vil. But she found it incredibly difficult, which was odd to me, given that she's a CEO in the technology space, a space that's not known for being very welcoming to women in general or broad participation, and she's clearly succeeded to anyone's capabilities there, but had that view on government. Any thoughts on that or how you've maneuvered that?
I think, you know, running for governor, running for executive positions is rare for women. There's so few women governors, and I don't even know the statistics, but I know it's small. Women are only 3% of our CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, only 16% of board members for Fortune 500 companies as well. So we really haven't achieved a level of parity in real, the highest levers of power on any industry. So Congress, 20% of the Senate, 18% of the House. So I don't know. I mean, her challenges are real. It's hard to get elected, and people's perceptions of women are interesting and difficult sometimes. So I write a chapter about appearance. This is the one that got all the press early on.
I was staying away from it.
But this is probably relevant for her. So the chapter is about how our appearances as women affect us in different careers. Because it does, it's just an issue, and we all deal with it in our own way, and we should, in a way that makes us comfortable. But in my industry, what they say is when women's appearance is commented on in a political campaign, whether it's positive or negative, so whether you're said you're beautiful or ugly, it doesn't matter. When you're commented on, it undermines you. It actually undermines your credibility in the minds of the voters. And so it's often used as a tool by opponents to undermine them. So for example, my first campaign was pretty funny. My opponent first went out with, oh, she's just a pretty face, meaning she couldn't possibly be smart and couldn't possibly do this job. I said, thank you, and that was it. The second tact he tried was using really unattractive pictures. And so he found ugly pictures from a press conference where my hair was blowing wildly, and then he washed the mailer with green, so I looked like a witch, that I was this power-crazed woman. So he used both sides of the same coin, pretty and ugly, to undermine me. So the advice I give in the chapter is really that we just need to know our standards in our industry and how we might be judged, and then make your own judgments. Yeah. For example, if you remember any story about when a politician wore something unexpected or her hair didn't look like it normally looked, how the press coverage was only about that. And I use one example. When Hillary did one of her debates and wore that orange jacket, if anybody watched that debate, the commentary about her clothes never ended. It was the whole length of the debate, even though her answers were amazing. So one of our challenges is you have to decide how much do you want people to talk about how you look and whether there's anything you can do to shift that. And so for me, I wear simple colors: black, brown, blue, gray, no orange, and I want people, I don't want them to notice what I'm wearing, actually. I would like them only to notice what I'm saying and what I'm doing and what I care about. And so I minimize it in my career because that's what you can expect in my industry. Everyone will make their own judgment, and young women will often decide, I'm going to wear exactly what I want because I like these clothes and I don't care if I'm going to get comments. That is their right and their own judgment, and they should. My advice is just know what they're going to think about you or say about you or how they will react to you so that you can assess it fairly and then make your own judgments. Hillary is at the stage in her career where she says, if I'm going to wear my glasses, I'm going to wear my glasses. If I'm going to put my hair in a ponytail, I'm going to put my hair in a ponytail. It's not my concern anymore, and if people want to talk about it, that's their business. I'm not there yet, but she is, and God bless her. God bless her. So I just use it as a place to talk about, because we just need to be aware, but no, it's a reality. You will be judged on how you look. I start the book, the opening line is, if I had a daughter, I would tell her certain things. I would tell her that it's good to be smart, really smart. People may judge you on how you look or what you wear, but it's much more important to focus on what you do and what you say, and that your voice matters. And so it's really just reality, and then we deal with it however we want. And so Meg's campaign, she had a lot of ups and downs, and you could go through it and talk about it, but what's important to me is that all women aspire to what they want to do and not be afraid to do it, and that we encourage and help each other. And for particularly the women in this room, we touched on it earlier, mentoring someone else is so valuable. Hillary mentored me in a way that took all of 90 minutes over a decade, but every bit of advice she ever gave me was invaluable. When I first wanted to run for Congress in 2004, I had just had Theo, and I really didn't know what I was doing on any level. And she never said, don't run. She never said, this race is too hard or you're not going to win. She just asked me questions, and I didn't have any answers to those questions. So it became obvious to me that I wasn't ready. But when I wanted to run in 2006, I had gone to 3 campaign training schools. I had already had my son, and he was a 3-year-old, so I understood a lot more of my parenting job than I did when he was only a couple months old. I was well aware of my district. I'd been spending tons of time working there and meeting constituents. I was ready. And so when I said, will you look at my poll? Will you analyze it? She was like, I've got the poll. I've already looked at it, and I've already talked to 4 people. So she already had her advice for me. But that call, she just said what I needed to hear. She said, Kirsten, just know why you're running and know what it will feel like if you don't win. Know that you're going to do this regardless of the outcome. And she gave me advice about the rough and tumble and what to expect. But what really mattered the most to me is she said, Kirsten, I'm there for you. Whatever you need, I will be there for you. And she meant it. She showed up to the district twice. She did 2 big fundraisers. She sent her husband twice, and he came a day before the election. So every picture on every paper election day was me and Bill Clinton going like this. And that was so helpful. So please be mentors to other women. You don't know how much your life experience could help them in that tough decision-making moment. I remember mentoring one young woman who worked on my first campaign staff, and she desperately wanted to work for the Clinton Global Initiative, and she was telling me about this job. Her name's Rain, and she said, oh yeah, I want to apply for this job. It's this #2 position on childhood obesity. I said, well, who will your boss be? And she said, oh, they haven't hired that person yet either. I said, Rain, why aren't you applying for the top job? You are so knowledgeable about this issue. You are more than qualified. Why aren't you applying for the top job? If you don't apply for it, they're going to hire someone who's not going to know as much as you and will probably be a guy. And you will be kicking yourself because you didn't apply. And she said, well, I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't know if... I said, just apply. If you don't get the job, then you can apply for the #2 spot. She got the job. But that was 2 minutes of mentoring for me, but a lifetime of opportunity for her, because now she's running a whole division. That really mattered for her, for me to nudge her and just to say, you can do this. So we can all mentor, and that's one of the things any woman can do wherever they are in their career, because there's always somebody younger than us. There's always somebody who's newer at the job. There's always some bit of life advice that you've learned and that any young woman would benefit from, and particularly for the men in the audience. Mentoring women is invaluable for you as well, because you will have some important advice to give to women as well.
So talk about, as women aspire to do all of these things, which many, many people are out of necessity and are out of desire. But you make an interesting point about the conversation of having it all. Can you just for a second highlight why you dislike the word have?
So I really hate the phrase. I think it's really demeaning. What I first hate about it is the having. What are we actually having? Are we having a party? Are we having a second slice of pie? We're obviously having something that we are not entitled to because we're having. So I hate that part. And then the all is demeaning for women who stay at home, because you're saying if only working women have it all, then that means all the women at home have some half-full life. It demeans women, and it pits women against each other in a very undermining way. So what I'd rather us talk about is doing it all, because women have been doing it all for a very long time without the support they actually need. Again, 8 out of 10 moms are working, so they are doing it all. And so why don't we talk about what supports they need to do it well? What do they need in the home? What do they need in the workplace? What do they need structurally, like universal pre-K or affordable daycare? And that's the debate we should be having, because that's the one that's relevant. Most women must work. They have to feed their children. 4 out of 10 women are primary or sole wage earners. So we shouldn't be debating this as a choice. It's either a necessity or something women want to do. It's not like they get to decide. It is a reality, and so when we're not talking about doing it all and pitting women against each other, we're not actually looking for the solutions that we desperately need.
So audience, this is now your warning, 5 minutes. I'm going to steal a page from the Inside Actors Studio, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to ask my questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So think of your questions now. What is your favorite word?
It's not a word, it's a phrase.
You're allowed.
We can do it.
You're a senator. You can do whatever you'd like.
It's Rosie's phrase. We can do it.
And what is your least favorite word?
We can't do it.
What turns you off?
Being dismissed.
I'm not going to ask her what turns her on. But she did write in the...
Rooms full of women who want to change the world.
And you did actually say, and used a few choice words in the book. What is your favorite curse word?
Oh, I don't want to say that. there are reporters in here, but it's 3 words, and that's all I'm going to say.
That's good. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, the laughter of my children.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The complaining of my children.
And what profession would you never want to have?
Oh, that's hard.
You can skip that one.
I'm going to skip that. I don't want someone to feel bad. When I said Arlington was a soulless suburb, I got in so much trouble. The internet blew up because all the people who lived in Arlington said, it's not soulless, it's not soulless, it's a great suburb. But the book, you'll see, it wasn't about Arlington at the time. It was a part where I was sharing about my marriage and how it was in a challenging place and nothing seemed to fit. So I don't like to say mean things.
And if heaven, if you remember this one, if heaven exists, what would you like God to say when you meet him at the pearly gates?
Good job.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the book. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. So do we go sign books now?
Thanks so much, Michelle, and thanks, Senator. We'd now like to go out to the audience for questions. If you could please raise your hands and wait for a mic. We'll try right here. Table 2, please.
Thank you. Hi, Senator. Thank you for being here. Really inspiring. What advice would you give to women? Chicago is a city where not a lot of us grew up here, but some people did, and it's hard to get involved in politics in Chicago specifically when you're not from Illinois originally. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to get involved in an area that they don't know a lot about?
Well, Bridget Gaynor's in the audience, and she is starting an Off the Sidelines chapter right now. And what she's going to do is engage women and young women in advocacy on things they care about. And she's working really hard on how to help women who have been arrested for prostitution and given criminal sentences and trying to get them on their feet. She's doing a lot of advocacy on how the most at-risk women are treated and how to give them the support they need to get on with their lives. So that's a good idea. But the other thing that I would recommend is just asking friends. I feel that women are so good at networking and really good at finding like where your issue is. So for example, and this is just anecdotal, I send out emails from time to time about local charities that I think do great things. And I sent out an email about Dress for Success, which I love, which is a not-for-profit that collects all our work suits that don't fit us anymore, we don't wear anymore, and they give them to women who are just starting out, help them with their first resume, help them learn interviewing skills, and then they monitor their careers for the first year. So it's a really helpful not-for-profit. So I send it out to my supporters, and some young woman in Buffalo says, oh my God, I love this idea, I'm gonna do it, goes through her closet, gets all her stuff, calls Dress for Success, where's your Buffalo chapter? And they said, oh, we don't have anything in Buffalo. And she said, really? And so she founded one. She founded the Buffalo chapter for Dress for Success. And so she created her own voice and did something that was mattered to her. So I think just networking and finding what you care most about and then finding the best outlet for that is always the way to go. Because your passion is what's going to drive your work. The thing that you care about is going to drive your participation. So.
Next question. Yes, please. The woman at table 3, please.
Hello. My question is, the thing that disturbs me the most about Washington right now is the constant gridlock and how it doesn't seem to be a way to narrow the gap between the parties. And so I'm wondering what roles you think that we as women, as advocates who may not be in public service, can really push lawmakers to find a way to stop that so that we can progress on the topics that do matter to us.
Well, I think we should change the players list, and we should actually elect people who do want to work together. And I would recommend electing more women. And that may seem simple, but I actually think it would make a huge difference, because in the Senate, for example, the women senators get along. We have quarterly dinners. When Barbara Mikulski was the second senator, she decided we need women's caucus meetings. And so she started having dinner with her other Senate colleague. That has lasted for over 20 years, and so we are still having these quarterly dinners. And so what it means is we get to know each other as women first, as friends, as mothers, as daughters. And it makes a difference because we want to see each other succeed. So any bill I've ever passed in the Senate, I've had a strong Republican woman helping me. So whether it was the 9/11 health bill with Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins and Olympia Snow going into their caucus meetings every week saying, why aren't we standing with first responders? We are the party of first responders. Or whether it was Susan Collins leading the charge with me on Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, or banning insider trading by members of Congress, something really obvious. She was there to help write that bill. And on sexual assault in the military, 20 out of 20 women helped author legislation to reform that. 17 out of 20 women supported all the reforms that we debated. And so what we see among the women is we are often very good at leaving the partisan politics on the side, getting rid of the partisan bickering, listening well to each other, finding common ground, building consensus from there, and getting things done. And so really, my long-term solution for fixing Washington is elect more women.
Yes, next question. There was a question right behind there, wasn't there? The woman at table 10?
Essentially has a very similar question. Thanks for doing what you're doing. I really applaud you for your candor and think that you've helped encourage a lot of really positive conversations. I was just curious to know what your female Republican colleagues, what response you've gotten from them, and if they've been sharing some of the same stories that you write about.
I don't think any of them have read the book yet, but I did send one to each one. So I will know after the election whether they liked it or not. I think they'll see themselves in all of these stories. I mean, most of the stories, we have a lot in common amongst all women who are working and raising a family and caring about their community. But our juggles are relatively easy compared to women who are low-wage workers, the woman working double shifts at the emergency room, the woman cleaning the ballroom, the woman who is a daycare provider. She has no flexibility, and I'm telling you, that is the biggest challenge for any working person and any working mom. To not be able to accommodate the needs of your family members when there are emergencies is probably the most heart-wrenching decision that we are constantly asking of our female workers, and of the male workers too. But despite a lot of progress, women are still responsible for 70% of all housework and childcare in America today. So disproportionately, it still falls on us. And often we want to do it. I want to be there when my mother's ill. I want to be there if my child is gravely sick. Or I want to be there when I have a newborn. So that is our biggest challenge. And I think they will see themselves in all these stories, because it happens to all of us.
Yeah, next question, please. Right over here, the gentleman at table 9.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you. Roger Goodell is one of your constituents, so I wonder if he has reached out to you for advice in regard to the issues. And even if he has not, do you see this as an opportunity to advance a legislative agenda at the federal level to just deal with this horrible problem of domestic abuse?
You know, I have to say the NFL really failed. They failed America. They failed their supporters. To give that player a slap on the wrist when he admitted to beating his wife and they had video evidence of him dragging her out of an elevator, there were no facts left in dispute. He should have been fired right then and there. The NFL needs a zero tolerance policy, and they do because they're a tax-exempt organization that has enormous responsibility in terms of role models for our children. And the fact that they allow people who are convicted or accused or admit to this kind of violence with no accountability, it's unacceptable. And so I expect that Roger Goodell will either lead a reform, and if he chooses not to be replaced, because this has to be taken care of. I wouldn't be surprised if Congress begins to look into it. I know there's bills about its not-for-profit status already, but it's concerning because, again, it goes to the degradation and devaluing of women. And it's not okay to beat your wife. It is a crime. It's called assault. And it shouldn't be tolerated. It's not okay to beat your children. It's not okay. And we as a nation, and as all the opinion makers and leaders in this room, we have to have a national conversation about it. And there has to be transparency. Again, the institutional bias, closing ranks, again, around that favorite son, that favorite player, that favorite soldier, whatever it is devaluing women in almost every example.
Thank you. Next question. Yeah, the lady right there, please, at table 11.
Thank you, Senator. Your phrase about we can do it, and positive stuff.
Sorry, could you talk more closely to the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thanks.
If you could please comment on how we would shift the agenda of fear in corporations. I love the idea about the pre-K, the paid time off and all of that. A lot of what we hear from corporations is, well, if we were to put in programs like that, we couldn't hire as many workers. We would have to lay people off. Now, I don't believe that's the case, but how do we balance both legislative and also social movements to get people believing that we will be economically stronger country if we put in things that benefit women, that benefit families, as opposed to we're going to have to lay more people off?
Well, if you look at sort of the highest wage industries, the professional industries, they're doing this very well in some instances. You look at Ernst & Young, they are the leader in valuing their women and creating programs to support their women, to cultivate their women, to keep them in leadership, and it's making a huge difference in terms of performance. They're just performing better, and they are a better and stronger company because of it. So I just think we have to make the case, the economic case, for all workers, for low-wage workers. For example, if you're going to fire that woman because her daughter's sick and she needs to stay home with her daughter, or because she's sick, why do you want your employee coming to work sick? Why don't you want her to be able to care for her loved one and be a more loyal employee? If you fire her, you're going to have to retrain somebody else. And all that money and cost that is wasted because you're retraining someone you replaced because they needed just a small measure of flexibility to deal with a family emergency, it's pound foolish, penny wise, pound foolish, and you are wasting all that time, effort, and training that you've put into that employee. So I think we can begin to make the business case that when you refuse to have family-friendly policies, you're going to have workers who are less loyal, workers who are less eager to be there, workers who can't do their job if they're going through some traumatic tragedy within their lives or some difficulty. And I think if we can begin to make that for all workers, not just the highest wage workers, but also the low wage worker, we'd be a stronger country. One of our biggest problems is we don't have a living wage for the minimum wage, and 2/3 of minimum wage earners are women. Minimum wage today in this country is poverty level if you have kids. So a woman working 40 hours a week, full-time job, working full-time, is living in poverty if she has 2 kids and earning the minimum wage. And that's millions of people, millions. And so what are we expecting her to do? We promised, the American dream was always, if you work hard, you will make your way to the middle class. That is not true if you are a low-wage worker with no support. It's not going to happen, because you are never going to get out of the lowest paid job, because you won't have the flexibility when you need it, and you will either lose your job or have to quit your job. So I think we make the business case, and I think there's a lot of organizations that are trying to do that now, a lot of not-for-profits. There's also, somebody asked this question at an event just last week. They said women are responsible for the vast majority of all buying power in the United States. They make almost all the decisions about what they're going to spend their money on for their family. They're biggest consumers in this and there and that place. But they have huge buying power. How do you translate that into affecting change on issues that affect women? And I thought that was an amazing point, because I would love to figure out how to do that. And I know there's organizations that are trying to rate companies. Is this a pro-family company? Do they have paid leave? Do they have sick days? And they're called EDGE certified in the same way we have LEED certified. That's a really innovative way to do it. Imagine if we had the ability to rate companies. Does this company offer paid leave or sick days for their employees? And if not, they don't, so you just don't use it. So let's say you have a choice between Walmart and Target, and one's really good on these issues and the other one isn't. Maybe we make our choices where we're going to do our low-cost shopping. Those are ideas that people should debate and talk about, because we have enormous power, but our voices aren't being heard. These issues aren't on the national agenda. They're not being passed anytime soon. And I think if we all thought about what would really make a difference in our family or our community, they should be.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. The Senator will be signing her book outside, but please join me in thanking Michelle and the Senator and Jenny. Thanks to you all for participating, and we'll see you at Nick Christoph.